When we think about the validity of a measure, you need to keep in mind that it's not an all or nothing thing. A measure isn't just valid or invalid, it's whether it's valid for the given purpose and the given population. So if I have a tape measure, that will give is a valid measure of the circumference of your head. However, if I measure the circumference of your head and use that as a measure of your IQ, that is not a valid measure of your IQ. We're going to discuss four kinds of validity. So face validity, content validity, criterion validity, and construct validity. Within criterion validity, we'll further break that down into concurrent and predictive validity. Face validity is the weakest kind of validity. That's, does this measure pass the sniff test? And the way this is typically established is you show your instrument to some experts who have experience measuring what you're interested in and ask them if it makes sense to them. Content validity is slightly stronger. Content validity is measured with something called the Content Validity Index. We're not really going to get into that in this class. The idea of content validity is your measure covering the items or concepts that are important for that measure? So if you think about all the stuff you could possibly measure, only some of that stuff actually matters for what you want to measure. So if you're interested in quality of life, then pain and income and general mood, those are probably part of the stuff that matters. And things like educational attainment may not be part of the stuff that matters. If your instrument measures some of the stuff that matters and some of the stuff that doesn't, then you've got low content validity. If your instrument measures some of the stuff that matters, but not all of the stuff that matters, you've got medium content validity. If your instrument measures most or all of the stuff that matters, you've got high content validity. In this class, we're mostly going to focus on construct and criterion validity. Construct validity is weaker than criterion validity. Construct validity is for when we're measuring something where there isn't a gold standard that we can compare it to. For convergent construct validity, what we're doing is measuring the same people at the same time with two different measures, one of which we think is already valid, and the other we're interested in determining whether it's valid. If we get similar results, that's convergent construct validity. We may also want to establish something called discriminant construct validity. So in this case, we measure the same people at the same time, and then we apply two different measures, one of which is the thing we're interested in. The other is a completely different measure, something that should not be related to the construct we're interested in. And what we're looking for there is very different results. Known groups construct validity. Here we're taking two separate groups who should have different values on this measure. So if we were measuring IQ, we might take 6-year-olds and 18-year-olds. If we were measuring pain, we might take people who had recently had a stroke or people who had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and people who had not been diagnosed with these. We give them the same measure and we look for very different results. Criterion validity can only be established when we've got some kind of gold standard that we can compare our measure to. Criterion validity, where we're going to measure the same people at the same time and compare our measure to what we get from the gold standard. If they're similar, that's how we establish criterion validity. Criterion validity, we divide between concurrent and predictive. Concurrent means that our measure matches the value we get from a gold standard at that time. Predictive validity means that our measure matches some future value. So concurrent validity, an example would be if we were looking at two different goniometers. We had one goniometer that was our gold standard and a second goniometer. If we measured someone's range of motion using both, that would be establishing concurrent validity. If we had a test that was going to predict future range of motion, then we would be applying the measurement now and then waiting until later and measuring their range of motion again and seeing if those two values matched up. Construct validity, there are a number of different ways of establishing it. We've talked about three: known groups, convergent, and divergent. There are also approaches like factor analysis and hypothesis testing. We're not going to discuss those in this class. So construct and criterion validity are easy to confuse. So construct validity, that means we expect the measure to behave like our measure behaves like we would expect it to, but we don't have this gold standard to make an absolute comparison with. One way of establishing it is with known groups. There we're looking at different groups that should have different values. If they do, then that gives us evidence of construct validity. If we want to measure criterion validity, if we're looking at what is now, that's concurrent. If we're predicting what will be, that's predictive.